That's my phone, unfortunately. I thought it was somewhere here. Off.
Why didn't you just come forward at the time when I asked you if you had a girlfriend? Why didn't you just come clean then?
I'm glad you asked it because...
She claims you deceived her. Your stomach must have been turning, though.
Scott Peterson is serving a life sentence, convicted of the murders of his wife Laci and their unborn son. Peterson's defense team, LA Innocence Project, has filed several motions this year for a new trial, as Peterson continues to claim that he's innocent. However, what do Peterson's own words tell us about him? How do his statements give clues about his personality? This video looks at key moments from Peterson's exclusive interview with Gloria Gomez, when Peterson's wife was still just missing. On this channel, we look at what influential people and criminals say, what they really say. Welcome aboard. In the following, Peterson's asked a personal question. Peterson, however, doesn't start by using the personal pronoun I. He starts by using the pronoun we, giving a general answer.
First of all, describe what the past month has been for you.
It's been absolutely terrible, as it is for everyone. I mean, you see us in press conference. You haven't seen me as much in the media, but you see our families and the raw emotion that's out there and the grief, the frustration. You know, we go through a range of emotions from anger to frustration to grief.
Peterson immediately associates with other people. Interestingly then, he isn't describing personal feelings. He isn't the one who's frustrated. He says you see the grief and the frustration. Aside from this being distancing language, this way of phrasing it indicates that he's concerned with how people perceive him. This concern is a pattern in this interview. In statement analysis, distancing language is noted because when it becomes a pattern, it suggests that the speaker is distancing himself from his experiential memory, most often because of guilty knowledge. As an expression, you know is used so many times that most people don't take note of it. However, strictly speaking, the expression implies shared knowledge that the other speaker, in this case Gomez, knows what the first speaker is talking about, even though the other speaker doesn't know. Thus, the expression points to the first speaker being self-aware, aware of himself and how he comes across, and aware of the other person in the room, Gomez. Peterson's use of this expression increases as the conversation progresses.
We go through a range of emotions from anger to frustration to grief. For me, it comes at different times during the day. I mean, we have a core group of volunteers still working to get her picture out there nationally. So we continue to work. Many people do. For me,
These words create a contrast to what he just said, and he stresses me as if the answer he just gave about frustration and grief doesn't apply to him, and then he goes back to the pronoun we, associating with many people. And in the following, his distancing language continues, this time with the impersonal pronoun you and a notable lack of self-reference.
And we can do that during the day, and unfortunately at night, don't know what to do when the grief hits and it's unbearable. But you also have to recognize that Laci is hurting worse than any of us. She's the one that's not with our family. She's the one that we need to find and bring home.
I know you have
so
moments.
That gives you focus. It gives you, there are times when you just can't continue, and if you're driving, you have to pull over and stop, and if you're doing something, you just can't continue. Try to stay busy and have a task, to know what to do, a positive task, and try to focus on that. Don't know what to do when the grief hits, and it's...
This is lack of self-reference in form of a pronoun drop. Thus, Peterson doesn't say that he doesn't know what to do. Likewise, he doesn't say who experiences this grief. The only hint of something personal is the adverb unfortunately.
And unfortunately at night,
which sounds understated and misplaced in this context.
Try to stay busy and have a task, to know what to do, a positive task.
Who tries to stay busy? Who tries to have a positive task? Deceptive people often minimize references to themselves. In the same vein, Peterson doesn't say that he can't continue, but that you can't continue.
There are times when you just can't continue, and if you're driving, you have to pull over and stop, and if you're doing something, you just can't continue.
He repeats the phrase "can't continue," struggling to give what should be personal descriptions of personal feelings.
You just can't continue, and it's unbearable, but you also have to recognize that.
Peterson's voice cracks as if he's overwhelmed with emotions.
Unbearable, but
yet he's able to go straight to a rationalization and keep a straight face and voice. This points to what's been hinted at since the beginning of this interview, that Peterson uses effective prosody, the manipulation of his pitch and speech rate, to convey emotion, that his voice is performative, to be perceived a certain way and not heartfelt.
And it's unbearable, but you also have to recognize that.
With the conjunction "but," he creates a contrast between his impersonal descriptions of feelings and what Laci's going through. This way, he can make the conversation about Laci and not his emotions that he can't express naturally, and he can sound self-effacing in the process, but even in this process, he can't bring himself to say "me."
Laci is hurting worse than any of us. It's
only because of the interviewer's probing that he finally says "I."
I know that there are certain areas you can't go to. It's hard to go to the park.
It's hard to go to, it's important though, because in the mornings when down there alone, I feel closer to her. Maybe that's an attempt to communicate or something, but yeah, definitely.
So is he communicating or not? He should know that. He's the one who goes to the park. He says it's important, but not for the reasons he lets on. It's important for him to go to the park in order to be seen by people, playing the role of the grieving husband. However, what Peterson might not be factoring in is that this activity is most common, albeit not exclusive, for people who know that a given family member is dead and not just missing. Next, we're in for some twisted logic and mental gymnastics, Peterson's way of justifying his behavior.
And you mentioned right off the start that you haven't been in the media.
No.
Why?
It was for the first 3 days or so when she disappeared. It was an absolute privacy issue. Not showing the grief of our family, not exploiting that. After that, it was a conscious decision to remain out of the media eye, decided upon by everyone in the family and the volunteers, in order to, and I'm sorry to say it, to media, but to keep the media here, to keep them hungry for, an interview with me or a picture, so that they would keep coming back, so this story won't fall through the cracks as it has happened with other missing people, with other abductions. And it's up to the family to keep that going. So we made that conscious decision together that I wouldn't speak. Obviously, we did lots of media with the rest of the family. And to keep him here, I didn't.
So to keep media interested in his wife's disappearance, he would stay out of media. It was okay for the rest of the family to do lots of media, which is his overcompensating way of phrasing it, just not for him. This is backwards logic. Husbands, wives, and parents would welcome any earnest attention. Even if we accepted Peterson's premise, spouses and parents wouldn't think in terms of what would keep the media hungry, and this was after waiting 3 days, which in a missing person case is unheard of. Peterson rationalizes as someone with guilty knowledge.
Not showing the grief of our family, not exploiting that.
With the word grief, he speaks as if it's too late, that he knows his wife is dead. In a missing person case, relatives would be out doing everything they could to find their missing loved one. In order to defend himself, he creates a false narrative with him and his family as the protagonists who grieve, and the media as the antagonists who want to exploit that. His self-protective and thus self-serving language is also underlined by the way he associates with other people, or hides behind other people rather.
Decided upon by everyone in the family and the volunteers. And so we made that conscious decision together in order to, and I'm sorry to say it, to media, but to keep the media here, to keep them hungry for.
Peterson's apology is unreliable. He's not sorry for saying this, because it's his poor attempt at an excuse as to why he didn't want to be interviewed. Also, the word sorry should be noted. People with guilty knowledge will frequently admit to being sorry for things that they know they can't be convicted of, because there are things on their mind that they don't disclose and that they actually can be convicted of. During his interrogation, Chris Watts, who was convicted of the murders of his wife and children, admits to an action that he knows he can't be convicted of, acting like that's his big secret, cheating. Let's watch.
But you weren't here today lying about something else. So we need to talk about that, okay? I cheated on her. I know. And this is very good. I'm not proud of it.
The phrase, "not proud of it," is an understatement that he apparently chooses instead of more direct phrases such as "I feel bad" or "I'm ashamed." It's only when he realizes that the agents aren't going to let him off the hook that he's forced to sound more apologetic.
She accused me of it. I denied it. I cheated on her, and I feel horrible for it. Like, she was pregnant, and it was... I don't want to...
His self-repairs reveal extreme internal stress and reluctance. His voice is low-key and he feigns being emotional and concerned as he fishes for the agent's understanding.
I don't want to... I didn't hurt her. I cheated on her. I hurt her emotionally. I cheated on her. And I feel absolutely horrible about this, but that's what I've been holding.
He repeats the verb hurt, presupposing that he did in fact hurt his wife somehow, even though he just stated that he didn't hurt her.
I didn't hurt her. I cheated on her. I hurt her emotionally. I cheated on her.
Watts has finally found something he thinks he can use to defend himself, failing to realize that his own speech behavior makes it unreliable, that cheating is the reason why he's been holding something back. So even when deceptive people try to get away with lies, their own language betrays them. Their language suggests that they know more than they're letting on. Watch this.
So this story won't fall through the cracks as it has happened with other missing people, with other abductions.
With the word other, Peterson implies that his wife's case is also an abduction case. But who said anything about abduction? Peterson himself presupposes and points to that, which, by the way, would have made it all the more relevant to have media involved right from the get-go. Everything Peterson says has a self-serving purpose, and speaking of self-serving, what made him do this interview? Concern for his wife? No, because he's worried about how he's perceived, his image.
But unfortunately now, the suspicions of me have grown so great due to people, wondering what happened to the inappropriate relationship that I had with Amber Frey, that it's necessary to speak its appropriate time to, in order to ask people to keep looking for Laci, because they're not looking for Laci as much as they should be right now.
There's a misalignment between Peterson's voice and face. Peterson only uses his voice in a contrived attempt to simulate emotions, because he keeps a firm gaze on Gomez, as if he's checking to see if she's buying it.
Because they're not looking for Laci as much as they should be right now. But unfortunately now...
Unfortunately, he says, as if he's annoyed that things aren't going according to plan. In relation to this, the word necessary also indicates that he's not doing this interview because he wants to.
That it's necessary.
His use of the expression increases when he talks about one of his extramarital relationships.
People, wondering what happened to the inappropriate relationship.
This indicates a high level of self-awareness, that this is a particularly sensitive issue for him. And rightfully so, because this affair flies in the face of his self-portrait of being a sympathetic and moral person who's only looking out for his family.
Absolute privacy issue. Not showing the grief of our family, not exploiting that.
The euphemism inappropriate relationship is a way of trying to downplay what he did. What he's doing here is very manipulative. What he really wants is for people to stop talking about his affair, but he knows he can't say that, so instead he makes it sound like people's focus on his affair keeps them from looking for Laci. So now he's interested in asking people to search for Laci, but yet he had no problem waiting 3 days before getting media involved. Sure. Also, it's possible to do two things at the same time. Focusing on his affair and searching for Laci aren't mutually exclusive, no matter how much he wants that to be the case.
I know when I approached you on Amber Frey, and I told you that I would be reporting that you had a girlfriend,
Right.
your response to me is that you had no comment either way. Why didn't you just come clean then?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question.
Which is what everyone who isn't glad about being asked a certain question says. I'm sure he's glad. That must be why he's tried so hard to avoid doing interviews. Next, notice the adverb simply with which Peterson tries to normalize his questionable decisions.
It simply, wasn't appropriate to comment on it. And unfortunately, there has been a statement in the press that I denied it, which was made with another reporter when I characterized a National Enquirer article as a pack of lies. And I did so without reading the article, unfortunately.
When you refer to an article as a pack of lies, it's quite obvious that people are going to assume that you're denying the article's content. Still, that doesn't stop Peterson from saying unfortunately twice, sounding annoyed that things haven't gone according to plan.
And unfortunately,
It wasn't appropriate to comment on it then, but it is now. What's changed? Nothing except the pressure on Peterson. Still, that doesn't stop him from repeating this.
Why didn't you just come forward at the time when I asked you if you had a girlfriend? Why didn't you just come clean then?
Right. At that time, it wasn't appropriate to comment about because it's not relevant. And I'm glad you asked it because there's reports that I denied it.
An extramarital relationship isn't relevant in a missing person case. It could be the direct reason why the person is missing. Even if it were true that he hadn't read the article, his actions would still be irresponsible because his wife was missing. So what if the article contained relevant information about her or the events leading up to her disappearance? Peterson had already started to behave like someone who knew he was guilty, treating media as enemies and not as important allies.
So I called it a pack of lies, not knowing that she was in there. So it's just not important to comment about that. And I'm glad that Amber came forward. You want me to turn that off?
Yeah, what is that?
That's my phone, unfortunately. I thought it was off. And I'll just answer that question again. Somewhere here.
It sounds like a phone.
Yeah, it's kind of going crazy, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, so if you just want to ask your question again, I'll just...
Okay.
Peterson's first reaction is to turn off the phone without even considering that it could be an important call. But then again, Peterson knows that there isn't going to be an important call because he knows what's happened to his wife. This way, Peterson's experiential memory, which manifests itself in his language and behavior, betrays him.
I'm glad that Amber came forward.
Yes, he looks ecstatic. It totally doesn't sound like he's saying that to disguise how annoyed he is, especially because he finds it necessary to keep repeating it. Sort of like a mantra that employees in a company have to say but don't believe in, like equity and inclusion. But I digress.
Now, I'm glad that Amber did the press conference. I'm glad that she came forward because it allows us, and it allows lots of people, I believe, to start looking for Laci again because it's slacked off because of that, because there's suspicion about me.
The reason why we can know that Peterson's being deceptive when he says he's glad about Amber coming forward is because if he really believed that admitting to the affair would help find Laci, he would have admitted to the affair when Gomez originally asked him about it. Peterson does what he did earlier, which is to deceptively make it look like you can't do two things at the same time, focus on the affair and find Laci. Us and lots of people, he says, once again hiding behind other people, so that it doesn't look like he's alone in thinking this poor attempt at an excuse. Peterson points fingers at anything and everything so as to avoid pointing fingers at himself, because he's the common denominator.
She claims you deceived her. She claims
Amber?
that, yeah.
Yes, she did not know. She did not know that I was married. That is correct. And, so I'm glad she came forward. I informed her that I am married, and of Laci's disappearance shortly after, Christmas Eve. It was a couple of days after Christmas Eve. I don't know the exact date. I'm glad she did the press conference. I'm glad that's out there. It had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. Glad.
Yes, because people are always glad when they're accused of being deceitful. Peterson makes the way he informed Amber sound noble and voluntary, when the truth is he was forced to tell her because it was all over the media. Thus, it makes sense why he did everything he could to avoid media. He put his own well-being over Laci's, his own image, how he wanted to be perceived by people, and therefore his extramarital relationship has everything to do with this case.
It's not relevant.
Your stomach must have been turning, though, when you see her go on television and it's national. And here's this girl saying, he lied to me. He told me he was single.
Sure.
I mean, your stomach must have been turning.
You know what? It was a positive to allow us to go on to search for Laci. That's how I view it, and that's how I felt about it.
The Rocha family
I said, good, this will be done, and we can keep looking for Laci.
Peterson thinks he's good at putting a positive spin on something that's purely negative. This suggests a manipulative mindset, same as the mindset of most politicians, by the way, a mindset that he's most likely used throughout his life in order to come across as the good guy. And again, it's possible to do two things at the same time. Amber didn't have to come forward to allow us to go on to search for Laci, as he phrases it. Previously, he stressed his decision not to be interviewed as an absolute privacy issue.
Absolute privacy issue.
And he stressed that people's focus on his affair stopped them from searching for Laci. But now, suddenly, he's acting like he's glad that his private life is made public. In order to stay logically consistent, he should actually be against Amber coming forward, as it'll raise even more questions about him, and thus slow down the search for Laci. But then again, this isn't about Peterson wanting to stay logically consistent. This is about Peterson trying to answer questions in the most self-serving way possible, in an interview he never wanted to do, no matter how glad he is.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question.
What do you think about this interview? Let us know in the comments. See you next time.